Welcome to another Multiplayer Monday. And today we're going to talk about a few gotchas like Network Transform, how some features like parenting, moving, rotating works with Network Transforms, so spawning versus single player. Because oftentimes in single player, it's really easy to just parent something or update a transform and call it good. But when it comes to spawning objects in certain places and moving them or making sure they're accurate with the client, in multiplayer game is a lot different. And what I've seen is that often people struggle and go crazy trying to debug it because they don't know what's going on. The same is with turning on assets. This applies to all the network solutions. I'm going to be referencing Fusion, but this is something that you have to keep in mind when working with multiplayer games. NGO, like Unity's network solution, Normcore, whatever is Fishnet, whatever network solution you're using, you got to be aware of what's going on with the transform because I've seen it. Sack, my friend, with a car game. What happened is he would spawn the car, and for some reason the car would reset to 0 0. And there was a lot of bugs that happened with that. And sometimes Unity transform would default back, or oftentimes you set the transform and you replicate that, but then like a split second later, the game will reset it to 0 0, and you're like, why is it doing that? And so this is for that. And also because oftentimes what I see also is when things don't work, you default back to the way single player works, because if that worked, it should work for multiplayer, but it doesn't. So don't do that. And I'm going to explain why. I am going to suggest the easiest way, and if you want to go dive deeper into the subject and figure out how to parent stuff and in a network solution, you can do that. But for this video, we're just going to try to give you the best option that I think gives you more sanity, because I tried parenting stuff and I'm still not sure how to do that well. And so I usually default back to this method, okay? Because I know it works, and oftentimes parenting causes issues. So when you wanna, in this case, because scale, because for example, when I spawned the diagonal fire, I want it to be a certain scale depending on how far the player drew the gesture. So like if I draw it super big, I want a big diagonal slash. And so what happens is I don't want to have to network the scale constantly. I just want it once, and I want it set for everything. So instead of doing it constant, so I have in Fusion, you have this runner.spawn, and you can have this delegate that spawns that makes sure that the prefab or the network object is preloaded with this before it does anything else. It's a initializer type thing. So, and this is the same for, I know Unity NGO has it. It's just a little bit different maybe. But okay, so we have the runner and the network object, and then we get the component, the bullet, and we set up the Y scale. So it's like a setup. And what happens is I know that this value is set. This is the value that I want. And this will only happen on the host. And it will always happen first before anyone else. What I remember is when I started with Fusion, I would always think the rookie mistake was I would set all these values here on spawn, and then I would have to like go back and forth between the client and the owner of the script or the prefab, that I would go back and forth trying to make sure they matched. And so I would have all these functions and RPCs going back and forth trying to make sure everything matched. And so you don't need to do that, right? That's why this is here. Is you set the scale at the beginning where there's player names and other things, and I know that if I have this here, it will be correct for every single player. See this? I have this local scale, and I said, okay, give me the scale Y. It's a network float, and it's going to get set right here before anyone else sees this script. Before this is triggered, everyone will do that. And so this is a good way to like initialize a network object in Fusion. And similar setups work for other network solutions. It's just something that you have to think about, because in network solutions, you don't have you don't know when things are going to spawn, right? So there is no set of orders unless that network solution gives you a way of saying, okay, this is going to spawn first, this is second, this is third. There's no order of operations in the sense of what gets spawned first. So you don't know if this is dependent on other network scripts, you don't know which one's going to get called first. And so that's why this will help you make sure that whatever you need to set before this script gets called, you can do that. Okay, so that way it gives you sanity, you know what's going on and the order. Okay. So we have that. The next step, since we're talking about spawn, another, you could say, rookie mistake is doing start. This is like the biggest headache. This is what I did a long time too. So there's like, it's not bad. It's just that we're used to doing things on start and awake. And then I would be like, why is this not working? And so then you would add like a yield or a coroutine to wait for the object to spawn. But the reality is that don't use start or wake on network objects because you don't know when they're ready. Because oftentimes you'll go in here and you start grabbing like the local scale or other things. But the thing is, there is some like pre-warm or initialization that needs to happen before an object is ready because there's more things that need to happen. And so you don't know when it's going to be ready, and it depends, right? Like, because some people load it faster depending on their device. And so you don't want to have to guess when a variable is available. And so instead of doing all this crazy on start, don't ever use start because it's not going to work. Is on spawn, because on spawn tells you, okay, this game object is connected to the network runner. It's ready to go. Okay, this is saying this object is ready. It's networked. It's connected. All the calls are going to work. Okay. You also, maybe just in case, I always just do the base so that it doesn't skip anything. Because if I don't do this, it will not call the other spawn functions that it might inherit. Okay, like in here. And we'll talk that in a little bit. Hold on. So we'll do something in a second. But anyways, spawn. And then you can change, does this guy have state authority? If it does, this is the direction that we need to do. And we have a countdown and other things. This is how you initialize, start, figure things out. This is for everybody so that the scale's the same. Now we're going to talk about this override that I was mentioning. The thing with overrides is that if you don't do the base, it will not execute. So let's say I have this network trigger damage and it inherits from network behavior. This doesn't have any spawn. It's just an on trigger enter, right? And on spawn, I could do an override here. I could public override void spawn. Okay, so I could do this, and let's say I do whatever, right? Or let's say debug.log bullet type magic spawned or whatever. If I go back to the other script in here, or come on, in here, and I remove this, it will not trigger the base. So it won't trigger this debug. Okay, so sometimes you want, and this has to do with the abstract class overriding. But that's just like a quick reminder too. Sometimes I've gotten mixed up and I forget to do that, and so I get in the habit of just doing it all the time because I oftentimes assume that that's happening. And so that way things work out. Okay, fixed update network is the similar version for the update loop, and it works. If you have a network transform, you want to do that here. The next thing that I want to talk about is the network transform, because I often was under the impression that if you spawn something and you tell it where to spawn, that it will spawn that for everybody. But that is not the case. And maybe it's different per network solution, but it's something that you have to be aware of. Again, is you spawn something, is it going to be there? The one thing that you don't want to do is hide network objects. If you don't need it there, despawn it. If you need to spawn, if you want it there later, then you spawn it. There's no reason for you to hide an object, or maybe there is, but the logic should be different because you're going to get problems with that. Okay, because you have to spawn it, and so you either spawn it by you instantiating it with the spawn method, or the scene does it when it loads. Fixed update. So with the transform, what happens is that when I do, let me show you back this setup. When I do this spawn, I put it in here. It will spawn, but it will not show. It will, for the other players, it will not be anywhere unless I tell it. So one thing I could do the same thing that I do for the scale Y. If you're spawning something in the scene, and you want it to spawn at a certain location, and you don't care if it tracks after that, because it's a one-time spawn, you could set it up like this, where you have a vector 3, and you just set the position here, and then in here you make sure you do it once. Okay, that is the way that I think it should work by default. I thought that if I spawn in a certain position, it would replicate it. It doesn't. So the way we do it is by putting a network transform. And most of the time, even with unless you're doing real physics, I try to use a network transform and move it myself. That is probably the best, because if you want to do physics, then you want to use photon quantum, because that is made for that. But let's say we have this diagonal spell again, and I'm gonna show you. Okay, so in here, no, this is not it. I'm gonna blast this one. Here we have the network bullet. And what you see in here, I'll show you, is this network transform. And see how it says sync parent and scale? These are not the most robust, in my opinion, okay? The local scale and is not very, yeah, so it can get pretty messy if you do like parent and scale, because then it tries to sync those and it's not very good. Usually I just do it myself. But let's say we have this network transform, okay? Even with this network transform, there's certain things that are not gonna be happening unless you do them yourself. So for example, okay, we have the network transform, it's gonna update, but I still need to move the transform along the line. So what this is doing is saying, okay, a bullet is gonna just move in the trajectory that it's going. So if the direction, the speed, and then it's just gonna change the transform position. Okay, that's all it's doing. And then the network transform is gonna update it for the rest, and I don't have to worry about that. So that's one way of doing it. The other way you can do that is by changing the network transform. See how this has state authority? It's only happening on the state authority. I could just do this on everybody by going here and then having a vector3 variable in here. So I could have something like vector3, but then I think you're doing too much because you don't need to. But if you're having problems, you can always do this as a last resort. Transform, and let's just call it NT for network transform. Hopefully you'll let me, yeah, okay. And then you would go in here and do network transform is the updated, right? So it will update the network transform based on this change. And then you would have to, if it has state authority, you change this, network transform is this, right? So that's like a way to force it without, like, that's what this is kind of doing. It's doing it more, it's better than what you're doing. But if you wanted to just change the position and not the rotation, you could do that yourself, right? You could just remove this network transform and do this here. The other thing you could do is on change, but then it depends. It's just how hard you want to do it. There's multiple ways. Let's go back to where we had it. The other thing I want to talk about for doing this is I'm going to show you this because we had this happen with our healing spell, like I said, and that's what we were going to do here. The spell would spawn at the player's position, but then we needed to set it up, right? And the issue with this is it doesn't matter when this sets up, and that's why we have this set healing. It's because it's not a huge deal if it's set up after the fact or before. We don't need it to be super dependent on that. It will eventually happen, but we could do a similar setup like we did with the other one if we needed to. So let me show you what happens, because usually what happens is in here, what we have is on spawn, right? So on spawn, if you have state authority, we will get certain things in here for the trigger healing. And on trigger enter, it'll detect what is entering and it'll heal. And those are some stuff that we need to do on our own, but for the most part, that should work. I'm gonna show you the spells now. Get my headset on, connect. Okay, so I think I have the spell. Yeah, so I have this healing spell, and you can see in here is that we have it, and there's some things that are still missing, but we have the spell is there, and it's not going to go away. So for now, it's okay. But here's we have the sphere, and if I move, you'll see that it moves with me, right? So that transform is working. And so the next thing I need to do is make a build and put it on my headset, and then play test it with the editor and double check, make sure that wherever I go, this thing is actually following me, or both me and the client. So you have to do those checks. And then you want to check with multiple people because you want to make sure that it's all working in all cases, and you have to test a bunch of edge cases. The other gotcha is that if you want to really be ready for launching your game live, you really want to stress test it as much as you can. When deciding how many players max, that's something that you need to be aware of. So all these things are like, so you have the gotchas, and then you have the testing that you have to do, and sometimes that can get complicated. That's why I do it in steps. I make sure it's good for me, then that it's working, and then I do it 2 players, and 3 players, and then you can. That's pretty good. So oftentimes that's why I say build to headset device, because oftentimes in the editor you might see it differently. It can get confusing. The whole point of this is to help you get a grasp on network solutions. And for this tip was just spawning and transforms and making sure everything is tied together, because this is something that I went over today. We're talking about the earth healing and trying to figure out this thing on how to make sure it's following you and using the correct functions. If you like this, please like the video, subscribe if you want to know more. I do multiplayer Mondays every Monday, and every Thursday we do level up videos. If you have any questions, you need help You can ask in the comment sections or join Endgame Devs, where I help developers finish their games. So I do one-on-one calls, I coach, I help you finish your games and actually make good games so that you can do them faster than you would do it on your own. So we'll see you next week for another Multiplayer Monday.